If you're working toward a specific retirement number, I want to ask you one question. Where did that number actually come from? For most people, the honest answer is that it came from somewhere pretty vague. A conversation with an advisor years ago, maybe an article, a rule of thumb that got repeated enough times that it started to feel like a fact. It sounded reasonable, so it stuck. And now that number is quietly setting your retirement date. What it usually isn't is a real analysis of your spending, not a line item look at your life that you're actually planning to live later on, just an estimate, often made years ago, that nobody's really questioned since. Those rules often have a logic to them, and they're not necessarily crazy, but notice what they're built on. They're built on your income. And for most people who have saved $2 million or more, your income and the actual cost of your retirement are two very different things. So here's why that matters. An income-based rule almost always produces a target that's higher, sometimes much higher, than what your retirement will really cost. And the gap between that inflated number and your real one tends to get measured in years. Specifically, years of your 60s, which are the healthiest and most capable years you have, traded for savings you may not have needed to keep building. So let me walk you through where that inflation actually comes from and how to think about your real number instead. Let's start with the rule itself. Take someone earning 420 grand a year, and generally in that case, the common guidance is that they'll need about 75% of that in retirement, so roughly 315 grand a year. Run that through a 4% withdrawal rate, which is about the inverse of 25 times expenses. You get a target of around $7.9 million. Apply that same logic to someone earning 180 grand and you land near 3.4 million. Same rule, different income, same underlying problem though. And just so it's clear, the numbers I'll use today are round, illustrative figures to make the ideas concrete. They're not advice for anyone in any situation. Here's the basic problem. A replacement ratio like 75% is a blunt instrument. It's pretty much a starting guess, not just an answer. The whole reason the rule lands at 75% instead of 100 is that it assumes some of your current spending disappears when you stop working. But it makes that assumption using a broad national average, not your life. For households that have saved pretty well, the real figure is often lower still. And the only way to know how is to build, or to know if that's true, is to build it from the ground up. So let's build it. Think about what you spend today that simply won't exist once you retire. The first is everything you're currently saving. If you've built toward $2 million or more, you've probably been setting aside a meaningful share of your income for years, maybe even 15 to 20% of that income. And the day you retire, that stops. You're no longer saving for retirement. You're actually living it. The second is payroll tax. The Social Security and Medicare taxes that come out of every paycheck, what's called FICA, apply to earned income from your job that you had. They don't apply to withdrawals from your retirement accounts, to your investment income, or to your Social Security benefits. But for many high earners, that's somewhere in the range of $12,000 to $20,000 a year that comes off of the top the moment your paychecks stop. The third is the cost of working itself. Commuting, the professional wardrobe, going to lunch, the tools and subscriptions that exist only because of your job. For most people, that runs $10,000 to $20,000 a year, and most of that goes away as well. The fourth is the one that people oftentimes forget, and it's oftentimes the biggest, the mortgage. A lot of people in their late 50s who've saved well are also 5 to 10 years into a 30-year mortgage, or close to an end of a 15-year one. If your payment is $3,000 to $3,500 a month, it's gone by 63 or 64 years old. That's $36,000 to $42,000 a year that drops out of your retirement budget. Unlike the national rule of thumb, this one is specific to you and it can move your numbers substantially. Add all those things up, and before you've built a detailed budget, you've already found tens of thousands of dollars a year of spending that either disappears or shrinks meaningfully in retirement. The exact figure isn't the point. The point is that your real cost of living in retirement is something that you can actually calculate. And when you do, it's almost always lower than the number a percentage of income rule hands to you. And we still haven't even added Social Security. For a couple with solid earnings histories, combined benefits can be a meaningful piece of the picture. Whatever comes in from Social Security is income that your portfolio doesn't have to provide. So your portfolio only needs to cover the gap between your real spending and the income arriving from other sources. That gap is your target. That's your real target, and it's usually far smaller than the one that the rule of thumb produced. Now, timing matters a lot here, and this is where a lot of plans get sloppy. If you retire in your early 60s, Social Security isn't there on day one. The earliest you can claim is 62, and claiming that early means a permanent reduction in your benefit. If you wait until your full retirement age, which is now 67 for just about everyone approaching this decision, the benefit is larger, but it's still years away. So in the first stretch of retirement, your portfolio is carrying the full load, and Social Security layers in later on to lighten it. A real plan accounts for that bridge. It doesn't just subtract a future benefit from today's spending and call it finished. So let's say you've done this, you've built your real number, and you're at or near it. Here's the shift that changes how the whole decision feels. Here's one way to see it. A diversified portfolio of $3 or $4 million, invested with growth in mind, has historically averaged somewhere between 6% a year, basically. And average is the word that matters. No single year is promised. Some years are down, and the past doesn't dictate the future. But over time, at that size and that kind of average, a portfolio's own growth tended to run in the range of 180 to 240 grand a year. If your real retirement spending is, say, 150 to 170 grand, then on average, a portfolio like that has the potential to grow about as fast as you would draw from it. In other words, the accumulation phase, in any meaningful sense, may already be behind you. So what does one more year of work actually add to that point? After federal and state taxes at the rates that come in with the income it took to build a portfolio like this, a full additional year of work might net you $150,000 to $215,000. That's real, and we can't dismiss it. But notice that it's roughly the same order of magnitude as what a portfolio that size has on average produced on its own. So your work is no longer the main engine of your financial picture. The portfolio is. And here's what makes this more true over time, not less. As the balance grows, the dollars that its average growth represents grow right along with it, while your after-tax income from work stays roughly flat. So every additional year, your paycheck becomes a smaller fraction of what the portfolio is already doing on its own. Most people expect the opposite. They assume that staying longer makes the math stronger. At this level of savings, on average, it doesn't necessarily do that. What those extra years are mostly buying isn't a meaningfully stronger retirement. It's a later start to the one part of retirement you can't get back. So what are those years worth on the other side of the ledger? This is the part of traditional retirement conversations that almost never gets discussed because traditional planning is focused on the accumulation phase. But it belongs in this decision, in our opinion. Retirement spending isn't flat. The research on how retirees actually spend shows a fairly consistent pattern. People spend the most in the early active years, the travel, the experiences, the things they put off for decades. Then spending tends to ease through the 70s as the pace of life naturally settles. And I'll add one honest caveat because it actually matters here. Spending often ticks back up later in life, driven by healthcare and possibly the long-term care scenarios. And a sound plan keeps room for that. But the high energy, high experience spending, the part you've been looking forward to, is front-loaded in the early years. So think about what that means for your plan. The years when you have the most capacity to actually enjoy what you've saved are your early 60s, not your late 60s. And the international trips that take real physical stamina, the long hikes, the freedom to throw yourself into a second chapter without your body quietly setting the limits, that's a 61-year-old's retirement, much more than a 68-year-old's. And the difference between what's possible at 61 and at 66 is not small. It moves in one direction only. I'm not making a sentimental argument, I'm making a planning argument. If you're spending naturally front loads into the active years, then retiring at 60 versus 65 isn't only a lifestyle preference. It's the difference between funding your most engaged years with a portfolio that's ready for them and arriving a few years later with more money than you needed and less capacity to use it the way you pictured. A portfolio can recover from a bad year, but the time can't. So here's something that I see again and again. When we sit down and build real line item numbers, it usually moves the retirement date earlier than the person expected. sometimes by a year or more, sometimes by 3 or 4. The math says ready before the person feels ready. And knowing the math is different from believing it. There's a gap between the date the numbers support and the date someone has settled up in their head. And the gap isn't necessarily financial. It's the distance between what a spreadsheet shows and what feels safe. The plan was made before the analysis was run and the number feels right. And going back to check it is uncomfortable because if the real number is lower than the one you've been chasing, it means you've been working past the point where you actually needed to. But it's worth naming because the alternative, working past your real number without ever checking what that number is, carries a cost that isn't only financial, it's time. Now, there are 2 objections to all of this that I take seriously, and you should too. The first is about meaning. The income is significant, the work is engaging, the team, the identity, the feeling of being needed. None of that is nothing. And I would never tell you to ignore all those things. But here's the distinction that matters. Those are reasons to keep working, and they're good ones. What they shouldn't do is stand in for running the numbers, because in most cases, when we run them, the financial case for retiring at 60 or 61 is already stronger than the plan assumes. Purpose, leadership, enjoying what you do, those are valid reasons to stay. The money, in most cases, is not the obstacle. It was just never verified. The second objection is what's called the sequence of returns risk. It's the fear that the market falls right after you retire and does lasting damage for the duration of your plan because you're pulling income out of a portfolio while it's down. This is a real risk and it deserves a real answer. Not just reassurance, but it's a question of how your money is structured, not how much you have. A simple approach is to keep 2 or 3 years of living expenses in cash and short-term bonds, held separately from your stock investments. If the market drops, you spend from the reserve instead of selling investments at a loss. And you give the rest of the portfolio time to recover. You don't need another $1 or $2 million to solve this. You need a plan built for it. Those are very different answers, and confusing the two is one of the most common reasons people work longer than they needed to. So the question worth sitting with is simple. Where did your number actually come from, and has it ever been built on your real projected spending? For most people, the answer is no. And when it finally gets built from scratch, that date tends to move around quite a lot. I'm Justin Kuntz, a certified financial planner and managing director at Pacific Wealth Management here in San Diego. We're a fee-based fiduciary firm, legally required to act in your best interest, not in the interest of any product, commission, or outcome that benefits us. The people I work with have worked really hard, saved well, and are close to or already at a point where retirement is within reach, often sooner than they think. What most of them have in common is a target number that was never actually built from the ground up. It was borrowed from a rule of thumb and carried forward without anyone checking it against the real cost of retirement that they're planning. Sometimes the real analysis confirms that more time is genuinely needed. Sometimes it shows the window that seemed 5 years away is actually open right now. But you can't know which one is true for your specific situation until someone actually runs the numbers, not a percentage of your income. The life you're actually going to live is what matters. If you want to run that analysis, what retirement genuinely costs for your situation versus the number you're working towards, reach out through the link in the description below. We'll talk through your numbers and you'll walk away having a clearer picture of how much you actually needed to save to retire. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.